Favourite toy?
Jamie, he loves his koala bear he's got. But he hasn't got anything particular. He just likes something with a bit of noise. He got a plastic whale that throws things out the top, little balls.
A mysterious envelope arrived at Kensington Palace that would destroy everything. When Catherine tore it open, the DNA results inside made her collapse in tears. What she discovered about Diana was so explosive, the palace had spent decades hiding it, erasing records, threatening anyone who knew. But Diana left behind secret evidence, and when Catherine found it, she realised the royal family had been living a lie.
So my passion and the work of the Centre for Early Childhood stems from one essential truth: that the love we feel in our earliest years fundamentally shapes who we become and how we thrive as adults.
What was in that envelope? And why did it make Catherine risk everything to expose the truth the monarchy desperately wanted buried forever? Catherine's initial reaction was to set it aside, assuming it had been delivered to her by mistake. Palace protocol was strict about such things, and unmarked mail was typically screened before reaching any member of the royal family. Yet something about this envelope gave her pause. There was a weight to it, not just physical, but something more intangible that made her hesitate before setting it down. After a moment's consideration, she decided to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper bearing the letterhead of a laboratory she did not recognize. The document was marked confidential at the top, and below that, in bold lettering, were the words DNA report. As Catherine began to read, her hands grew still. The document compared genetic material from two individuals. One name she knew intimately, her late mother-in-law, Diana, Princess of Wales. The other name was unfamiliar to her, though it would soon become impossible to forget. The conclusion stated in the report was presented in the clinical, matter-of-fact language typical of scientific documents. But the implications of what those dry, technical phrases meant were anything but ordinary. According to the results laid out before her, there was a genetic connection that Palace Whispers had only ever dared to hint at in the most careful of terms. Catherine found herself reading the document again, then a third time, as if repetition might somehow change what was written there. It did not. The report she held was not simply a piece of paper with test results. It represented something far more significant, a truth that had been carefully guarded for decades, protected by layers of secrecy and denial. As the full meaning began to sink in, Catherine felt her breathing become shallow. She took a step backward, clutching the document against her chest, her eyes scanning the room around her as if seeing it for the first time. From somewhere down the corridor, she could hear the distant sound of her children laughing, completely unaware of the storm that had just been unleashed in their mother's world. As she stood there trying to process what she had discovered, memories began surfacing. Quiet conversations at family dinners that had always seemed slightly off, the way certain topics were carefully avoided or redirected, glances exchanged between family members when particular subjects came up. She had noticed these things over the years but had dismissed them as the ordinary tensions that exist in any family, particularly one living under constant public scrutiny. Now those same moments took on an entirely different meaning. For months, perhaps even years, there had been whispers circulating in certain circles. Stories about a hidden lineage, about a child who carried Diana's bloodline but not her name. Catherine had heard these rumours, as had anyone who paid attention to the more sensational tabloid coverage of the royal family. She had always assumed they were nothing more than cruel gossip, the kind of unfounded speculation that had plagued Diana during her lifetime and continued even after her death. But here in her hands was evidence suggesting that what she had dismissed as fiction might actually be rooted in fact. The timing could hardly have been worse. Relations between Catherine and other senior members of the family had already been strained over disagreements about how certain royal duties should be handled and what role she should play in the public eye. There had been tension, carefully managed and kept out of the press, but present nonetheless. Now, looking at this document, she began to wonder if those tensions had deeper roots than she had realised. Has there been knowledge among certain family members all along? Was this why there had been such careful control over her public image, such insistence that she follow established protocols without question? What Catherine had discovered had the potential to fundamentally alter public perception of the monarchy. She understood immediately why such information would have been guarded so carefully, why enormous effort would have been expended to ensure it remained hidden. The implications extended far beyond simple scandal or embarrassment. This was the kind of revelation that could shake the very foundations of an institution that had endured for centuries. She sank into the nearest chair, her eyes still fixed on the document in her lap. Only then did she realize that tears were streaming down her face. The sound of her own quiet sobs filled the otherwise silent room. She felt utterly alone in that moment, unsure of who she could trust with this information or what steps she should take next. The weight of what she now knew pressed down on her, and she understood with absolute certainty that there was no way to unknow this truth. It would be with her forever, shaping every decision she made going forward. As Catherine sat with the shocking results, fragments of memory began to coalesce in her mind. Things Diana had said, warnings she had left behind, not just for her sons, but for whoever would come after her. Catherine remembered attending an exhibition at Althorp, the Spencer family estate, years earlier. Among the items on display had been excerpts from Diana's personal diaries. At the time, they had seemed poetic, the reflections of a woman struggling with the constraints of royal life and an unhappy marriage. But now, recalling those words, they carried a different weight entirely. Diana had written about truth and secrets, about knowledge that was too dangerous to speak aloud. She had written about strength and courage, about waiting until the right moment to reveal what had been hidden. At the time, Catherine had interpreted these passages as metaphorical, expressions of Diana's emotional state rather than literal warnings. Now she understood they might have been both. There had been letters as well, correspondence between Diana and a close confidant whose name Catherine barely remembered. These letters, portions of which had been published in various biographies over the years, contained references to something Diana had discovered late in her marriage. She had described it as a secret that must remain hidden, warning that certain people would go to extraordinary lengths to protect the image they had carefully constructed for public consumption. Diana had written about the family not simply as relatives bound by blood and affection, but as something more calculated and institutional. Reading those letters years ago, Catherine had thought Diana was being paranoid, that the pressures of royal life had perhaps distorted her perspective. Now, holding this DNA report, she realized Diana had been trying to warn someone, and that someone, Catherine now understood, might have been her. Catherine knew she needed answers, and there was only one place where she might find them. The Spencer family estate at Althorp held more than just memories of Diana. It contained archives, personal papers, and items that had never been made fully public. Catherine made arrangements to visit, telling staff members and even William that she needed time away from London, a brief retreat for reflection and rest. It was not entirely untrue, though her real purpose was something she kept to herself. The estate greeted her with its usual grandeur, sprawling grounds and historic architecture that spoke of centuries of English aristocracy. Yet beneath that beauty, Catherine sensed something else, a heaviness in the air, as if the place itself was holding its breath. Every room she passed through reminded her of Diana, of a life cut tragically short, of secrets that had died with her, or so everyone had believed. After settling in, Catherine approached one of the older housekeepers, a woman who had served the Spencer family for decades. She asked carefully, mentioning that she was interested in seeing some of Diana's personal effects, items not typically shown to visitors. The housekeeper's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of understanding passing across her face. Without many questions, she agreed to show Catherine to a part of the house few people ever accessed. They walked down a long corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly, their footsteps echoing on polished floors. At the far end stood a narrow door, its brass handle worn smooth by years of use, though the stiffness of the hinges suggested it had not been opened recently. The housekeeper paused with her hand on the knob, meeting Catherine's eyes with a look that seemed to carry both warning and sympathy. Then, without a word, she turned and left Catherine standing alone before the closed door. Catherine opened it slowly. A rush of cold air met her, as if the room beyond had been holding its breath for years, waiting for this moment. The space was smaller than she had expected, but densely packed with history. Shelves lined every wall, filled with boxes, ledgers, and various items that had belonged to the Spencer family over generations. At first glance, it appeared to be simply a storage room for family memorabilia, nothing particularly remarkable. But then Catherine noticed something in the corner that made her heart skip. 3 boxes sat separate from the others, tied with faded ribbons that had once been vibrant but had dulled with time. What caught her attention immediately was the writing on the top box, unmistakably Diana's handwriting. The words read simply, "For Catherine, when the time is right." Her hands trembled as she approached them, understanding that Diana had anticipated this moment, had prepared for someone to find these boxes, and had specifically designated them for her. Catherine carefully untied the ribbon on the first box and lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in Diana's hurried hand. The tone was confessional, urgent, as if Diana had been racing against time to get her thoughts down on paper before something prevented her from doing so. As Catherine began reading, a picture emerged of a woman conducting her own private investigation into aspects of her life that others wanted to keep hidden. Diana wrote about secret meetings held away from palace oversight, about conversations she had recorded in her memory because she knew no one would believe her otherwise, about discoveries that had shaken her understanding of her own marriage and position. Among the letters were photographs, their colours slightly faded but the images still clear. They showed Diana with a man Catherine had never seen before. His features were striking, with a bearing that seemed almost aristocratic despite the informal settings of the photos. There was something hauntingly familiar about his face, though Catherine could not immediately place why. In several of the photographs, Diana and this man appeared to be deep in conversation, their body language suggesting a level of comfort and intimacy that went beyond casual acquaintance. Beneath the letters and photographs, Catherine found something that stopped her completely. A sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age, bore a single word written across its front in Diana's handwriting. The word was simply DNA. With shaking hands, Catherine opened it. Inside were documents similar to the ones that had been delivered to her at Kensington, though these were older, dated from years before Diana's death. Results suggested that Diana herself had been investigating the very same questions that now consumed Catherine. Diana had not simply suspected something. She had sought proof, had taken concrete steps to uncover the truth, and had documented her findings. The implications were staggering. This was not a recent revelation or a secret that had only come to light after Diana's death. She had known, had gathered evidence, and had apparently decided that the information was too dangerous to reveal while she was alive. Instead, she had preserved it, labelled it for Catherine specifically, and waited for the moment when it would be discovered. Catherine pulled out more photographs, studying them carefully. The man who appeared repeatedly alongside Diana had features that grew more familiar the longer she looked at them. There was something in the shape of his face, in his eyes, in the way he held himself that reminded her of someone she knew well. The realization came slowly and then all at once. The resemblance to Harry was unmistakable, not identical, but close enough to be deeply unsettling. This resemblance had fueled speculation for years. Tabloids had occasionally published unflattering comparisons, suggesting that Harry looked different from his brother William, implying things they could never say directly without facing legal consequences. Catherine had always dismissed such comparisons as malicious gossip, the kind of cruel speculation that the press engaged in when they wanted to sell papers. But now, looking at these photographs, seeing this man whose features so closely mirrored Harry's, she understood that the rumours might have been rooted in something real. Catherine spent hours in that room, going through every item in the 3 boxes Diana had left behind. There were more letters detailing meetings and conversations, journal entries where Diana had worked through her thoughts and fears, and copies of documents that appeared to have been obtained secretly. As Catherine pieced the information together, a story emerged of Diana's growing awareness that something significant was being hidden from her, and her determination to uncover it despite the risks. But the most troubling discovery was what Catherine found when she began cross-referencing the information from Diana's boxes with official records. The man who appeared in the photographs had a name, mentioned in several of Diana's letters. When Catherine tried to research him using the resources available at Althorp, she found that information about him was remarkably scarce. Birth records that should have existed seemed to be missing. Documents that would normally be filed with various government offices had apparently vanished or been sealed. It was as if someone had systematically erased his existence from official history, leaving only fragments and whispers behind. Determined to learn more, Catherine reached out to contacts who might be able to help her understand what she had found. Through careful inquiries, she eventually located one of Diana's closest confidants from that period, a woman who had largely stayed out of the public eye since Diana's death. Convincing her to meet was not easy. The woman was initially reluctant, clearly frightened of reopening old wounds or attracting unwanted attention. But when Catherine explained what she had discovered at Althorp and showed her some of the photographs, something shifted in the woman's demeanour. They met privately, away from anywhere they might be recognised or overheard. For a long time, the woman simply sat in silence, looking at the photographs Catherine had brought. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and shaky, as if the words themselves were difficult to form. She confirmed what Catherine had begun to suspect. The man in the photographs was real, not a fabrication or a case of mistaken identity. He had been part of Diana's life in ways that went beyond simple friendship or professional relationship. More significantly, the woman revealed that his existence had been known to certain people within the palace for years. The decision to suppress any information about him had been made at the highest levels, justified as necessary to protect the monarchy from scandal. Records had been deliberately obscured or destroyed. People who knew the truth had been encouraged, sometimes pressured, to remain silent. It had been, in the woman's words, a coordinated effort to erase a person from history while he was still alive. As Catherine absorbed this information, she realized she was no longer dealing with historical curiosity or family secrets. This was an active cover-up that had been maintained for decades, involving numerous people and requiring constant vigilance to keep hidden. And now she had uncovered it, had physical evidence of its existence, and faced the question of what to do with that knowledge. The man whose existence had been denied was still alive, still carrying the burden of a truth no one wanted to acknowledge. And Diana's final act, leaving those boxes for Catherine to find, had been an attempt to ensure that truth would eventually come to light. Catherine knew she could not carry this burden alone. The weight of what she had discovered was crushing, and the implications extended far beyond her own understanding or ability to handle. There was only one person she could truly trust with this information, only one person who had as much at stake in understanding the truth. She needed to tell William. She waited until the children were asleep and the palace had settled into its nighttime quiet. The corridors were empty, staff had retired for the evening, and the only sounds were the distant creaks and settling of the old building. Catherine found William in his study, working through paperwork as he often did late into the night. She entered quietly, closing the door behind her with care. He looked up, immediately sensing from her expression that something was wrong. Without preamble, Catherine placed the documents on the desk in front of him. The DNA results, copies of Diana's letters, and several of the photographs. At first, William barely glanced at them, his expression showing the kind of mild concern one might have for a minor household matter. But as his eyes focused on what was actually before him, as he began to read the names and dates and the conclusions spelled out in clinical language, his entire body went rigid. The silence that followed was profound. Catherine watched as William read through the documents, his face draining of colour with each page. When he finally looked up at her, his eyes held a mixture of disbelief and something deeper, something that looked like recognition. He tried to speak, his voice barely above a whisper, saying this could not be true, that the family had been through enough already, that such things were not possible. But even as he said the words, Catherine could see he did not believe them. She watched as the denial faded from his face, replaced by a dawning horror as memories began surfacing. William had been old enough when his mother died to remember her struggles, her tears, her desperate attempts to make people understand what she was going through. He had heard her late-night phone conversations, had seen her distress when she thought no one was watching. As a child, he had not fully understood what was happening. Now, as an adult looking at these documents, pieces were falling into place in ways that made him physically ill. The devastation on William's face was terrible to witness. Catherine saw him processing not just the immediate revelation, but all its implications. If what these documents showed was true, then everything he thought he knew about his family was built on a foundation of lies. His mother had been silenced, her truth suppressed, and he had been too young to help her, too sheltered to understand what was really happening. But beyond his grief for Diana, Catherine saw something else emerging in William's expression. Anger. A deep, burning rage at the people who had let this happen. at the institution that had demanded his mother's suffering in exchange for its own preservation, at his father, who had stood by while Diana struggled and who might have known far more than he ever admitted. The anger was all the more powerful because William had spent his entire life controlling his emotions, maintaining the composure expected of someone in his position. Now, confronted with this betrayal, that control was slipping. William's thoughts turned to Harry, and Catherine could see the moment when another terrible realization hit him. His brother, the one he had grown up with, protected and loved despite their differences, might have his entire identity built on a deception. Harry had always seemed somehow apart, had always struggled with his place in the family in ways William never fully understood. The press had been cruel to Harry, the comparisons, and insinuations constant throughout his childhood and into adulthood. William had defended him countless times, had insisted the speculation was baseless and malicious. Now he was faced with the possibility that those rumors, as cruel as they were, might have contained a kernel of truth that no one wanted to acknowledge. William sat with his head in his hands, and Catherine could see him being pulled in two different directions. On one side was his duty, everything he had been raised to believe about service to the crown, about preserving the institution regardless of personal cost. He had been taught from childhood that the monarchy was bigger than any individual, that personal feelings and even personal truths had to be subordinated to the greater good of maintaining stability and continuity. Walking away from that conditioning, from those deeply ingrained beliefs, was not something that could be done easily. On the other side was the memory of his mother, her suffering, and her courage. Diana had tried to tell her truth and had been destroyed for it. She had left evidence behind, had specifically arranged for it to be found, because she knew that someone needed to finish what she had started. William was being asked to choose between the institution he had been born to serve and the mother he had loved and lost. Catherine reached across the desk and took his hand. Her own voice was unsteady as she spoke, reminding him of Diana's courage, of the price she had paid for trying to live honestly within a system that demanded silence. She reminded him of the trail Diana had left behind, the careful documentation, the boxes labelled specifically for Catherine to find. Diana had endured years of pain and isolation because no one had been willing to stand beside her and validate her truth. Catherine looked directly at William and spoke words that hung in the air between them like a vow. She asked him not to let his mother's final secret die with him, not to allow her suffering to have been in vain. William's eyes filled with tears, the first time Catherine had seen him cry since his mother's funeral. He was torn between two versions of himself, the boy who had once promised his mother to protect her memory, and the man who now carried the weight of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. The choice before him was impossible, and Catherine could see the agony it caused him. Before William could make any decision, events took an unexpected turn. While Catherine and William were struggling with their grief and uncertainty behind closed doors, word of their discovery was spreading through the palace in the way that secrets always seem to spread in that place. Despite their caution, despite their efforts to keep the matter private, whispers were travelling through corridors and reaching ears they had not intended. One of those ears belonged to Camilla. She had survived decades in the public eye by being acutely aware of everything happening around her, by understanding the unspoken currents of palace life better than almost anyone. She had clawed her way to a position of influence through careful calculation and an unwavering determination to secure her place. And she had no intention of allowing this revelation to destroy what she had worked so hard to achieve. Catherine did not see her coming. One afternoon, Camilla appeared in the doorway of Catherine's private sitting room without announcement or invitation. Her expression was calm, almost pleasant, but her eyes held something harder. She entered without waiting for permission and settled herself into a chair as if she had been invited for tea. Camilla's tone was conversational, almost warm, as she congratulated Catherine on her discovery. She spoke as if they were discussing something mildly interesting rather than a potentially explosive family secret. Then, with the same pleasant tone, she revealed that she too had known about Diana's secret. She had watched from the sidelines as events unfolded years ago, had seen the pieces come together, and had understood their significance. More importantly, she had recognized the value of that knowledge and had used it strategically to ensure her own position within the family remained secure. Catherine felt a chill run through her, as Camilla spoke. Every word was delivered with careful precision, each sentence revealing how thoroughly Camilla had manipulated the situation to her advantage. She had turned knowledge of Diana's secret into leverage, using it to secure favor with those who most wanted it to remain hidden. Her path to becoming queen consort had been paved in part by her willingness to keep quiet when it mattered most. Then came the threat, delivered with the kind of understated menace that Camilla had perfected over years of navigating hostile social terrain. If Catherine chose to speak publicly about what she had discovered, Camilla warned, the consequences would extend far beyond damage to the monarchy. Catherine herself would be destroyed in the process. Camilla leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to something softer but somehow more threatening, as she mentioned that certain information about Catherine's own family, her past, and even details about her marriage could mysteriously find their way to the press. The implication was clear. Camilla had been gathering insurance for years, and she was prepared to use it. The tension in the room was suffocating. Catherine, who had spent years mastering the art of diplomatic grace, felt anger rising within her but forced herself to remain outwardly calm. She met Camilla's eyes and spoke steadily, pointing out that silence was exactly what had doomed Diana, that the truth deserved to be known regardless of the personal cost. But Camilla only smiled, a cold expression that did not reach her eyes, and delivered her final warning. If Catherine dared to reveal this secret, she would not just damage the monarchy. She would take herself down along with it. That night, Catherine lay awake long after William had fallen into an exhausted sleep beside her. Camilla's words echoed in her mind, poisoning her thoughts and shaking her resolve. The threat was real. Catherine understood that. Camilla had the connections and the ruthlessness to follow through on what she had promised. Speaking out could mean sacrificing everything Catherine had built, her reputation, her position, possibly even her relationship with her children, if custody became a battlefield. But as she lay there in the darkness, Catherine also thought about Diana, about a woman who had tried to tell the truth and had been systematically silenced, about evidence carefully preserved and labelled for Catherine to find, a final plea from beyond the grave for someone to have the courage Diana herself had not been allowed to exercise. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her, and she knew that whatever decision she made, she would have to live with the consequences for the rest of her life. The decision came to Catherine in the darkest hours of the night, when sleep refused to come and the weight of everything she knew had become unbearable. She had spent weeks wrestling with the choice before her, weighing duty against truth, safety against justice. But in the end, it was the memory of Diana that tipped the scales. A woman who had tried to speak her truth and been silenced at every turn, who had suffered in isolation because no one was willing to stand beside her. Catherine realized that if she remained silent now, she would be complicit in the very system that had destroyed her mother-in-law. With nowhere left to turn and every door inside the palace closed against her, Catherine made the decision to go public. She arranged a private press gathering, defying every rule of royal protocol and every expectation of obedience that came with her position. The decision was hers alone. William, though he understood her reasoning, was paralyzed by his own internal conflict and could not bring himself to support or oppose her choice. Catherine moved forward anyway, understanding that some actions cannot wait for consensus. On a cold morning in late autumn, reporters and photographers assembled outside the gates of Kensington Palace. Word had spread that the Duchess of Cambridge had called an impromptu press conference, something virtually unheard of in royal circles. Members of the press arrived with cameras and questions, their curiosity tinged with confusion. The palace had made no official statement about the gathering, which only added to the sense that something extraordinary was about to happen. When Catherine finally emerged, the crowd fell silent. She stood before them wearing a simple dark coat, her face pale but composed, her hands clutching a leather folder containing the documents that had upended her world. For a long moment, she simply stood there as if gathering the courage to speak the words that would change everything. Then, in a voice that trembled slightly but grew stronger as she continued, she began to tell Diana's story. Catherine spoke of the Princess of Wales not as the icon the public remembered, but as a real woman who had struggled against forces far more powerful than herself. She talked about Diana's courage, her determination to uncover the truth even when doing so put her at risk, and the price she had paid for refusing to remain silent. Catherine described the trail Diana had left behind, the carefully preserved evidence, the letters and photographs meant to ensure that someday someone would finish what she had started. Then Catherine opened the folder and held up the DNA evidence. Her voice cracked as she confirmed what the monarchy had spent decades denying, that Diana had a hidden child, a son whose very existence was proof of everything she had endured and everything she had tried to tell the world. The papers trembled in Catherine's hands as she spoke, and tears began streaming down her face. She made no effort to wipe them away. The reaction from the assembled press was immediate. Gasps rippled through the crowd as reporters struggled to absorb what they were hearing. Cameras clicked frantically, capturing every moment, every tear, every word that fell from Catherine's lips. Within minutes, the news was flashing around the globe. News websites crashed under the weight of traffic as millions of people tried to access the story simultaneously. Headlines screamed of betrayal and hidden heirs, and decades of lies finally exposed. The outpouring of public support was swift and overwhelming. Social media filled with messages praising Catherine's courage, calling her a hero for finally speaking the truth Diana had been prevented from telling. People who had loved Diana felt a sense of vindication, a confirmation of what many had long suspected, that she had been more sinned against than sinning, that the system had failed her in ways even more profound than previously understood. Inside the palace, however, the atmosphere was nothing short of catastrophic. The carefully constructed facade that had been maintained for decades was cracking in real time before the eyes of the world. Behind those historic walls, centuries of tradition and protocol were being tested as never before. Senior advisors scrambled to formulate a response, but there was no playbook for this situation. The monarchy had weathered scandals before, but never anything quite like this. As the cameras continued rolling, Catherine's strength finally gave way. Her knees buckled and she collapsed forward, caught by William, who had been standing just out of frame. He wrapped his arms around her as she sobbed into his shoulder, his own tears visible as cameras captured the raw emotion of the moment. In that embrace, witnessed by millions, it was clear that nothing would ever be the same for the royal family or for the institution they represented. Yet even as the world processed Catherine's revelation, one question remained unanswered. What would become of Diana's son, the man whose existence had just been confirmed to the entire world? Where was he, and what did he think of having his life thrust into the spotlight in such a dramatic fashion? The answer came sooner than anyone expected. Just days after Catherine's press conference, as speculation reached a fever pitch, he stepped forward. The location was carefully chosen, a neutral venue away from palace grounds but significant enough to underscore the importance of the moment. Media from around the world gathered as he approached the podium, his presence commanding attention even before he spoke. His appearance was striking. The resemblance that had been visible in decades-old photographs was even more apparent in person. He carried himself with a dignity that seemed to come naturally, as if the years spent in obscurity had forged him into someone beyond the reach of the monarchy's usual influence. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured but carried the weight of a lifetime of silence. He called Diana his mother without qualification or apology. He thanked Catherine for having the courage he admitted he himself had lacked for so many years. He spoke of the decades he had spent knowing who he was, but choosing silence. Initially to protect Diana's memory, and later because the truth seemed too dangerous to voice. Each word landed with impact, breaking through years of carefully constructed denial. Then came the question everyone feared but needed answered. Would he claim what many believed was rightfully his? His response was carefully worded but impossible to misinterpret. He spoke of blood that had been denied but could not be erased. He talked about his relationship with the crown, with his brothers, with the entire royal order being far from resolved. The implication was clear enough for anyone listening. This was not the end of the story, but rather the beginning of something new and uncertain. Inside the palace, the royal family watched his statement with expressions that revealed the deep fractures this revelation had created. William and Harry stood apart, their faces unreadable. Charles maintained a grim silence that spoke volumes. Camilla's expression betrayed nothing but cold calculation. The family that had once been united, at least in their public presentation, now stood visibly divided. Outside the palace gates, public reaction was equally split. Some saw him as rightfully claiming his place, others as a threat to centuries of tradition. There were calls for accountability, for answers, for a reckoning that no carefully worded palace statement could possibly satisfy. But there were also expressions of empathy, grief and solidarity with a man who had lived his entire life in the shadows of a secret others had created. As he finished speaking and stepped away from the podium, cameras caught Catherine watching from the sidelines. The revolution Diana had begun in life and prepared for in death was now complete. The monarchy would never be the same again.